Rose Everett, a gentle soul with golden hair, binds herself to Ivan Hawthorne, a cold millionaire, in a loveless contract to save her family. Trapped in a grand but hollow home, she pours warmth into small acts, flowers, candles, while he remains a distant enigma. Yet one gala night sparks jealousy. A desperate kiss on a bridge shatters their walls, and a near tragedy unveils buried truths. Follow their journey from icy distance to tender rediscovery, where every glance and touch becomes a step towards something real. As you drift to sleep, let this story wrap around you like a soft blanket. What will touch your heart most? Rate it 0 to 10 in the comments and share your thoughts. Did their love surprise you? Stay until the end. The stars have secrets to whisper. The Hawthorne Mansion stood like a sentinel against the winter sky, its ivory columns gleaming with an austere elegance that whispered of wealth and secrets. Frost clung to the manicured gardens, where boxwoods stood in rigid rows, their edges dusted with the first snow. Inside, the air was heavy with stillness, the kind that settles into grand spaces where life feels more like a performance than a pulse. Rose Everett moved through the foyer, her footsteps soft against the polished marble, as if she feared waking the house from its eternal slumber. Her golden blonde hair fell in gentle waves over her shoulders, catching the pale light that streamed through towering windows. Her eyes, the color of a summer sky, held a quiet resilience, though their edges betrayed a weariness no 26-year-old should carry. 3 years ago, Rose had walked through these doors, not as a bride, but as a savior. Her family's debts had loomed like a guillotine, threatening to sever the fragile threads of their modest life. Ivan Hawthorne, a millionaire with pale blonde hair and eyes like shards of ice, had offered a way out, a contract marriage to preserve his family's legacy and her family's survival. Love was never part of the bargain. "This is business. Don't expect more," he had said on their wedding day, his voice as cold as the platinum band he slid onto her finger. She hadn't argued. She had nodded, signed the papers, and stepped into a life where she was less a wife and more a ghost haunting her own existence. Now, on this December morning, Rose arranged blush pink peonies in a porcelain vase, their delicate petals a stark contrast to the mansion's severity. The act was one of many small rebellions. Lavender candles flickering on the mantel, cashmere throws draped over austere leather chairs, a single watercolor painting of a meadow hung in the dining room. These were her attempts to breathe warmth into a house that seemed determined to reject it. Each morning, she rose before dawn, brewed Ivan's espresso by 6:30 a.m., and vanished before his footsteps echoed down the grand staircase. Their interactions were sparse, confined to logistics, dinner menus, charity event schedules, the occasional nod as he passed through the foyer. It was a dance of distance, and Rose had mastered every step. She paused, her fingers lingering on a peony's soft edge, and caught her reflection in the gilded mirror across the room. The woman staring back was poised, her cream sweater and tailored trousers impeccable, but her eyes held a question she dared not voice. "Is this all I am?" The thought was a splinter, sharp and persistent, but she pushed it down, as she always did. There was no room for self-pity in the Hawthorne Mansion, only duty. The faint creak of a door broke her reverie. Ivan's study, tucked at the end of the corridor, was his sanctuary, a place she rarely entered. She glanced toward the sound, half expecting to see him, but the hallway remained empty. Her heart quickened, though she couldn't say why. Perhaps it was the weight of the silence, or the way the mansion seemed to watch her, its chandeliers glinting like eyes. She turned back to the vase, adjusting a stem that didn't need adjusting, and tried to shake the unease that clung to her like damp silk. Rose had learned early that Ivan was a man of precision, not passion. His pale features, sharp as a blade, and his tailored charcoal suits gave him the air of someone carved from ambition. He didn't shout or scold. He didn't need to. His presence alone commanded obedience, and his silence was a fortress she had never breached. Their conversations, when they happened, were transactional. "The board meeting is at 8 tomorrow," he might say, or "The caterers need your approval for the gala." She would nod, her voice soft and measured, and he would turn away, his attention already elsewhere. It was a rhythm she had grown accustomed to, though it left a hollow ache in her chest. She moved to the dining room, where a crystal chandelier cast prisms across the mahogany table. A single place setting awaited Ivan's breakfast: black coffee, a slice of rye toast, a newspaper folded precisely to his preferred section. Rose had memorized his routines, not out of affection, but survival. To exist in his world was to anticipate, to adapt, to become as unobtrusive as the shadows that pooled in the mansion's corners. She smoothed the tablecloth, her fingers brushing the fabric as if it might offer some comfort, and then stepped back, her work complete. The clock in the hall chimed 7, its notes reverberating through the empty space. Ivan would descend soon, his footsteps crisp against the marble, his briefcase in hand. Rose turned to leave, her slippers whispering across the floor, when a voice, low, sharp, unmistakable, cut through the stillness like a blade. "Rose!" She froze, her breath catching. Ivan stood in the archway, his navy suit immaculate, his pale hair catching the light like frost. His blue eyes, usually unreadable, held a glint of something she couldn't place. Resolve, perhaps, or calculation. "I need you at a gala tomorrow," he said, his tone as detached as if he were dictating a memo. "Investors expect a wife. Wear something elegant and stay quiet." The words landed like stones, heavy and cold. Rose's fingers tightened around the edge of the tablecloth, but she forced her face to remain composed. It was the first time in 3 years he had asked her to appear publicly as his wife. Not for a holiday, not for a photo, but for a performance of unity. Her mind raced with questions. Why now? Why me? But she knew better than to ask. Ivan didn't offer explanations. He offered terms. She nodded, her voice lodged somewhere between shock and resignation. "Of course," she managed, the words barely audible. He gave a curt nod, his gaze flicking to his watch as if the exchange were already forgotten. Then he was gone, his footsteps fading toward the front door, leaving Rose alone with the echo of his command. She released the tablecloth, her knuckles white, and turned to the window. Outside, the snow had begun to fall, soft and relentless, blanketing the world in silence. For a moment, she let herself imagine a different life. One where her laughter filled these halls, where her touch was welcomed, where her heart wasn't a stranger in her own home. But the fantasy dissolved as quickly as it came. She was Rose Everett, wife in name only, bound by a contract and a promise she could not break. Yet, as she watched the snow settle on the garden, a spark of defiance flickered within her. Tomorrow, she would step into his world, not as a shadow, but as a woman who refused to be invisible. She turned from the window, her resolve hardening. The gala was a summons, but it was also an opportunity. For one night, she would wear her courage like armor, and perhaps, just perhaps, Ivan Hawthorne would see her. Not the contract, not the duty, but her. The thought was a flame, small but fierce, and as she moved to prepare for the day, it burned quietly in her chest, promising a story yet to be written. The Hawthorne mansion exhaled a frosty breath as Rose Everett stood before the gilded mirror in her suite, the emerald gown clinging to her frame like a whispered dream. The fabric shimmered under the soft glow of the chandelier, its deep green hue accentuating the golden cascade of her hair, now swept into a loose chignon. Her reflection was a stranger, elegant, poised, yet haunted by the weight of Ivan Hawthorne's command. "Wear something elegant and stay quiet," he had said, his voice a cold directive that still echoed in her mind. For 3 years, she had been invisible in this house, a ghost tending to peonies and candles. Now, for the first time, she was summoned to play the role of his wife in public, and the prospect stirred a tempest of dread and defiance within her. Rose traced the gown's neckline, her fingers lingering on the delicate beadwork. She had chosen this dress before their wedding. Back when hope was a fragile flame she hadn't yet learned to smother. It was meant for a night of love, not obligation. But tonight, it would serve as her armor. She closed her eyes, whispering to the woman in the mirror, "One night, let me be more than a shadow." The words were a vow, as much to herself as to the unknown hours ahead. She slipped on silver heels, their click against the hardwood, a small rebellion against the silence that defined her life, and descended the grand staircase. Ivan waited by the front door, his black tuxedo sharp as a blade, his pale blonde hair catching the light like frost. His blue eyes flicked to her, pausing for a fraction longer than usual, and Rose felt the air shift, though his expression remained unreadable. "You'll do," he said, the words flat, devoid of warmth. She swallowed the sting, her chin lifting as she followed him to the waiting car. The Bentley's leather interior enveloped them, and as the driver pulled away, the mansion receded into the dusk, its ivory columns swallowed by the gathering dark. In the car, Ivan's voice cut through the hum of the engine. "Smile when addressed. Don't speak unless necessary. Investors value discretion." His instructions were delivered without a glance, his attention fixed on the city lights flickering beyond the window. Rose nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the emerald gown pooling around her like a lake. She wanted to ask why now? Why her? Why, after 3 years of polite avoidance, he needed her at his side. But the words caught in her throat. Ivan didn't offer reasons, he offered terms, and she had learned to accept them. The city blurred past, its neon veins pulsing with life, and Rose pressed her fingers against the cool glass, grounding herself against the uncertainty swelling in her chest. The gala was held in a glass-domed atrium, where chandeliers dripped crystal like frozen tears, and laughter floated on currents of champagne. As they stepped from the car, camera flashes erupted, pinning Rose in their glare. Ivan buttoned his jacket, his movements precise, and offered his hand. She placed hers in his, her touch light, careful not to betray the tremor in her fingers. The crowd parted for them, eyes tracing the striking pair, her delicate glow, his brooding power. But Rose felt the weight of their scrutiny like a second skin. They were a flawless facade, a couple sculpted for headlines, yet beneath the surface, her heart raced with questions she couldn't voice. Inside, the air was thick with perfume and ambition. Ivan slipped into his element, shaking hands with silver-haired executives, his charm a polished weapon. Rose stood at his side, her smile a practiced mask, her presence as ornamental as the orchids adorning the tables. "Mr. Hawthorne, a pleasure," one investor said, his gaze sliding past her. "Your wife is lovely," another offered, the compliment a formality that didn't reach her eyes. She nodded, murmured thanks, and felt herself fading, her role reduced to a silent prop in Ivan's carefully curated world. The hours stretched, each minute a slow erosion of her resolve, and her smile grew brittle, threatening to crack. When a waiter offered a tray of champagne, Rose took a flute, the cool glass a lifeline. She sipped, the bubbles sharp against her tongue, and excused herself, drifting to a quieter corner where the crowd's hum softened. The atrium's glass walls reflected the city's skyline, a constellation of lights that felt more alive than she did. She clutched the flute, her knuckles pale, and tried to steady the tremor in her hands. Was this what she had agreed to? A lifetime of being seen but never known? The thought was a knife, twisting deeper with each passing moment. She didn't notice Ivan's absence until his voice, low and clipped, reached her from across the room. He was deep in conversation with a group of investors, his posture relaxed, his laughter a sound she had never heard directed at her. The sight was a quiet wound, one she hadn't expected to feel. She turned away, her gaze falling to the champagne in her hand, and took another sip, letting the warmth dull the ache. The gala was a stage, and she was playing her part, but the script felt wrong, the lines unwritten. As she stood there, a shadow fell across her reflection in the glass. "You look like you're hiding," a voice said, warm and disarming. She turned to find a man with kind eyes and a crooked smile, his dark hair slightly tousled. "I'm Julian," he said, offering a glass of sparkling water. "And you are?" Rose hesitated, the weight of her married name a chain. "Rose," she said simply, and something in her softened. Julian's presence was a reprieve, his questions gentle, about the city, her favorite books, the stars beyond the glass dome. For the first time that night she laughed, the sound startling her with its freedom. Across the room, Ivan's head turned, his eyes narrowing as they found her. His laughter stopped, his hand tightened around his glass, and a storm gathered in his gaze. Rose didn't see it, but she felt the air shift, a prelude to something she couldn't yet name. The gala's glitter faded, and in that moment, the stage was set for a collision neither of them could avoid. The glass-domed atrium pulsed with the gala's opulence, its chandeliers casting prisms that danced across Rose Everett's emerald gown. She stood in a quiet corner, the champagne flute in her hand, a fragile anchor against the tide of invisibility that threatened to swallow her. Moments ago, Julian's warm conversation had coaxed a laugh from her lips, a sound so foreign it startled her. His kind eyes and easy smile had made her feel seen, not as Ivan Hawthorne's silent wife, but as Rose, a woman with thoughts, dreams, a pulse. The city's skyline glimmered beyond the glass walls, a distant promise of freedom, but the weight of the evening pressed heavier with each passing minute. She sipped her champagne, the bubbles sharp and reckless, and let herself linger in the fleeting warmth of being noticed. Across the room, Ivan moved through the crowd like a predator in a tailored tuxedo, his pale blonde hair catching the light as he leaned into conversations with investors. His laughter, smooth and calculated, reached her now and then, a reminder of the intimacy he reserved for everyone but her. Rose's gaze drifted to him, unbidden, and a quiet ache bloomed in her chest. She shouldn't care. Their marriage was a contract, a transaction sealed in cold ink, but the sight of him so effortlessly alive, while she faded into the gala's margins, stung like a betrayal. She turned back to Julian, forcing a smile as he recounted a story about a starlit hike, but her heart wasn't in it. The champagne warmed her veins, loosening the edges of her restraint, and she took another sip, then another, chasing the courage to endure the night. Julian's voice softened, his head tilting with genuine curiosity. "So, Rose, what's your escape when the world gets too loud?" The question caught her off guard, piercing the armor she'd worn for years. She opened her mouth to answer. Something about books, or the peonies she tended in the mansion's sterile halls. But a shadow fell over them, sharp and unyielding. Ivan's presence was a storm front, his blue eyes glinting with a fury that made the air crackle. His hand closed around her wrist, firm but not cruel, and his voice was low, taut with barely restrained anger. "We're leaving, now." Rose's smile vanished, her heart lurching as she met his gaze. Julian stepped back, his brows lifting in surprise, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Ivan, you're causing a scene," she whispered through clenched teeth, her voice trembling with a mix of defiance and embarrassment. But Ivan's grip didn't waver, his fingers a tether pulling her away from the corner. The conversation, the fleeting sense of being alive. The crowd's eyes followed them, whispers rippling like water disturbed by a stone, but Ivan moved with purpose, his stride cutting through the gala's glitter, as if it were nothing. She stumbled slightly, the champagne clouding her balance, but Ivan's hold steadied her, guiding her toward the exit. The glass doors loomed ahead and the cold night air hit her like a slap as they stepped outside. Camera flashes flickered, but Ivan ignored them, his jaw tight, his hand still encircling her wrist. The Bentley waited, its sleek frame a silent witness to the tension crackling between them. He opened the door, his movements precise, and Rose slid inside, the emerald gown pooling around her like spilled ink. Ivan followed, slamming the door with a force that echoed in the car's hushed interior. The engine purred to life, and the city lights streaked past, gold and silver veins against the dark. Rose stared out the window, her breath uneven, the champagne's warmth now a reckless fire in her blood. Ivan sat beside her, his posture rigid, one hand flexing open and closed on his thigh, the other gripping the edge of the seat. The silence was a blade, sharp and unforgiving, and for once, Rose refused to let it cut her first. "You don't get to act like you care," she said, her voice low but steady, each word a spark. 3 years, Ivan. 3 years of silence, and now you play the jealous husband because I dared to laugh with someone else?" His head snapped toward her, his eyes a storm of ice and flame. "You're my wife," he said, the words clipped, as if they explained everything. "Flirting in front of my colleagues reflects on me," Rose laughed, sharp and bitter, the sound slicing through the car's confines. "Wife? I'm your contract, your prop. You've never looked at me, not once, until someone else did." Her voice trembled, but she held his gaze, refusing to look away. The truth was a weight she'd carried too long, and now it spilled, reckless and raw. Ivan's knuckles whitened, his jaw working as if chewing on words he couldn't yet speak. The car veered slightly, the driver sensing the storm within, and Rose pressed herself against the door, her heart pounding. She expected him to retreat, to bury her words in the silence he wielded so well, but instead, he turned fully toward her, his expression a fractured mask. "You think I don't see you," he said, his voice rough, stripped of its usual polish. "The flowers, the candles, the way you make that house less empty? You're everywhere, Rose, and it's driving me mad." The confession hung between them, a live wire sparking in the dark. Rose's breath caught, her mind reeling. For a moment, she saw something in his eyes. Not anger, not possession, but a raw, unguarded need that mirrored her own. Before she could respond, Ivan leaned closer, his hand still on her wrist, his thumb brushing the pulse point beneath her skin. The car slowed, the city giving way to a quieter road, and Rose felt the world tilt, the gala's glitter fading into a memory she couldn't grasp. She wanted to pull away, to demand answers, but the champagne and the weight of his words anchored her. The car rolled to a stop, the driver's silhouette still in the front, and Ivan's gaze held hers, unrelenting. "You don't understand," he said, softer now, almost a plea. "I didn't want to see you because seeing you meant admitting I—" He stopped, his jaw tightening, and Rose's heart thundered, teetering on the edge of something she couldn't name. The night stretched before them, vast and uncharted, and in that moment the Bentley was no longer just a car. It was a crucible, forging something new from the ashes of their silence. Rose's wrist burned under his touch, and as the city lights flickered in the distance, she knew the next words, the next move, would change everything. The Bentley's interior was a cocoon of charged silence, the city lights streaking past like embers in the night. Rose Everett pressed herself against the car door, her emerald gown a crumpled constellation around her, her wrist still burning from Ivan Hawthorne's touch. His words, "You're everywhere, Rose, and it's driving me mad," hung like smoke, thick with a truth neither of them had dared to face. Her heart pounded, a wild rhythm fueled by champagne and the raw edge of his confession. She wanted to lash out, to demand clarity, but the weight of his gaze, fractured with something like desperation, held her captive. The car hummed along the city's veins, but the air inside crackled, a storm waiting to break. Ivan's hand lingered on her wrist, his thumb tracing the pulse that betrayed her turmoil. His pale blonde hair caught the fleeting glow of streetlights, and his blue eyes, usually so cold, burned with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low, almost broken. "I didn't want to see you, because seeing you meant admitting I—" He stopped, his jaw clenching, as if the words were a tide he couldn't stem. Rose's mind spun, teetering between anger and a reckless hope she hadn't felt in years. "Admitting what?" The question burned, but before she could voice it, Ivan released her wrist and gripped the wheel, his knuckles white. The car swerved, exiting the freeway, onto a narrow road that climbed toward the river. The city fell away, replaced by the hush of trees and the glint of water under a star-pricked sky. The Bentley rolled to a stop on a stone bridge, its arches framing a river that shimmered like liquid obsidian. Ivan killed the engine, and the silence was deafening, a canvas for the emotions they'd buried for 3 years. Rose's chest tightened, the champagne's warmth now a reckless pulse in her veins. She turned to him, her voice sharp despite the tremor. "What are we doing here, Ivan? You drag me from the gala, say things I don't understand, and now what? You can't just—" Her words faltered as he faced her, his expression raw, stripped of the polished mask he wore so well. "You think I don't see you?" he said, his voice rough, each word a stone dropped into still water. "The peonies you arrange every morning, the candles you light to chase away the cold, the way you make that mausoleum of a house feel like something I don't deserve. I see it, Rose. I see you, and it's tearing me apart." His hands flexed, as if fighting the urge to reach for her again. "I built walls to keep you out because letting you in meant risking everything I've spent my life controlling." Rose stared, her breath shallow, the world narrowing to the space between them. The Ivan she knew was a fortress, cold, unyielding, a man who spoke in terms and never truths. Yet here, on this bridge, he was unraveling, his confession a crack in the ice that had defined their marriage. "Then why now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 years, Ivan. 3 years of silence, and you choose tonight to care?" His eyes darkened, a storm rolling in. "Because I saw you with him," he said, the words laced with a possessiveness that both infuriated and electrified her. "That man, Julian, he looked at you like you were the only person in the room. And it hit me like a blade. Someone else could see what I've been too afraid to face. I can't lose you, Rose. Not to him. Not to anyone." The air stilled, and before she could process the weight of his words, Ivan leaned across the console, his hand cupping her face. His touch was fire, reverent yet desperate, and then his lips found hers. A kiss that was not gentle, but a collision of hunger and regret. It tasted of champagne and unspoken apologies, of 3 years wasted and 1 moment too raw to contain. Rose froze, her mind screaming to pull away, but her body betrayed her, responding with a fierceness she hadn't known she possessed. Her hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, and for a fleeting second, the world dissolved. No mansion, no contract, just the heat of his breath and the truth laid bare. The kiss deepened, a reckless dance that threatened to consume them both. But the champagne's haze and the intensity of the moment crashed over her like a wave. Her vision blurred, her strength buckled, and she swayed, a soft gasp escaping her lips. Ivan broke the kiss, his eyes wide with alarm. "Rose," he whispered, catching her as she slumped against the seat, her head lolling to one side. His hands were gentle now, cradling her face, brushing golden strands from her flushed cheeks. "Rose, stay with me," he said, his voice laced with a fear she'd never heard before. He fumbled with the car door, the cool night air flooding in as he stepped out, rounding to her side. He lifted her carefully, her gown trailing like a comet's tail, and settled her back in the seat, reclining it to give her air. The stars above were sharp, unyielding, and Ivan knelt beside her, his hand brushing her wrist, checking her pulse with a tenderness that felt foreign, yet achingly right. "I'm here," he murmured, more to himself than to her, as her breathing steadied, her eyes fluttering but not opening. He drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near her, as if afraid she might vanish. The mansion loomed ahead, its lights glowing like a beacon in the mist, and Ivan carried her inside, past the peonies and the flickering candles she'd placed with such care. Up the grand staircase, through the corridors that had witnessed their distance, he brought her to her suite, laying her gently on the bed. He pulled the duvet over her, his movements deliberate, and sank into the armchair across the room, his tuxedo rumpled, his face tight with something deeper than guilt. As Rose slept, her breathing soft and even, Ivan watched the Hawthorne mansion lay cloaked in the hush of midnight, its marble corridors bathed in silver moonlight that spilled through tall windows. Rose Everett slept beneath a down comforter, her golden hair fanned across the pillow, her breath soft and even. The emerald gown, now a crumpled relic of the gala, lay discarded across a chaise lounge, its shimmer dulled by the night's chaos. In the velvet armchair across the room, Ivan Hawthorne sat motionless, his tuxedo rumpled, his pale blonde hair disheveled. His blue eyes, once icy fortresses, were fixed on Rose, tracing the gentle rise and fall of her chest. The kiss on the bridge, fierce, desperate, a collision of 3 years' silence, had left him unmoored, and her collapse from champagne and emotion had carved a fear into him he couldn't name. He hadn't moved since laying her in bed, as if leaving her side would break the fragile thread spun between them. The memory of her swaying in the car, her gasp fading into stillness, replayed in his mind like a wound. He had carried her through the mansion's grand doors, past the peonies she tended with such care, and up the staircase that had always separated their lives. Her warmth against his chest had felt like a revelation, a reminder of how little he'd truly known her. The candles she lit, the throws she draped over cold furniture. They weren't just decor, they were her defiance, her way of claiming a home that had never claimed her back. And he had been blind to it, locked in his own fortress of ambition and control, until the sight of her laughing with another man at the gala had cracked something open inside him. Morning crept into the room, a golden haze that softened the edges of the night's intensity. Rose stirred, her lashes fluttering against flushed cheeks, and her eyes, summer sky blue, blinked open, adjusting to the light. She registered the comforter tucked around her, the faint ache in her temples, and then him, Ivan, still in his tuxedo, shadows under his eyes, watching her with a stillness that made her breath catch. "You stayed?" she asked, her voice soft, threaded with disbelief. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tightly. "I wasn't sure you'd want me to," he said, his voice raspier than usual, as if the night had worn it thin. Rose sat up slowly, the memories of the bridge flooding back, the kiss, the fire, the dizziness that had pulled her under. Heat rushed to her cheeks and she pulled the comforter closer, shielding herself from the vulnerability of the moment. "Why did you kiss me, Ivan?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her chest. He stood, moving to the window where the dawn painted the gardens in hues of amber and rose. His silhouette was sharp against the light, a man caught between confession and restraint. Because I couldn't lie anymore, he said, his words deliberate. I saw you with that man at the gala, and it hit me. Someone else could see what I've ignored for so long. You're not invisible, Rose. I made you feel that way, and I'm sorry. The apology was a stone dropped into the still waters of her heart, sending ripples she wasn't ready to navigate. She rose, pulling a silk robe around her bare feet silent against the hardwood. I didn't need your empire or your name, she said, her voice low but firm. I needed you to care, not as a contract, but as a person. Ivan turned, his eyes meeting hers, raw and unguarded. I see that now, he said. I've spent years building walls, thinking vulnerability was a flaw. But last night, when you collapsed, I realized I was terrified of losing you. Rose's throat tightened, her resolve wavering under the weight of his honesty. She wanted to believe him, to trust the man who had kissed her like she was air he'd been starved of. But 3 years of silence loomed like a chasm. Words are easy, Ivan, she said, stepping closer, her gaze unwavering. What happens when we leave this room? He didn't flinch, his voice steady. Let me show you. Dinner tonight, just us. No investors, no masks. A chance to start over. She studied him, searching for the cold calculation she'd known so well, but found only a man stripped bare, offering something she'd never thought possible. The silence stretched, taut and fragile, until Rose nodded, her decision a leap across that chasm. One night, she said. That's all I promise. A flicker of relief crossed Ivan's face, and he stepped back, giving her space to breathe. I'll pick you up at 7, he said, and with a final glance he left the room, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Rose sank onto the bed, her heart a tangle of hope and caution. The day passed in a blur of routine. She arranged fresh peonies, lit a single candle, tried to anchor herself in the familiar. But the mansion felt different, as if the kiss had shifted its very foundation. By evening, she stood before her mirror, a flowing ivory dress replacing the gala's armor, her hair loose and wind-tousled. When Ivan appeared, he was transformed. No tuxedo, but a navy sweater and jeans, his cologne softer, his presence almost human. He drove them to a lakeside clearing, the stars above a canopy of quiet promises. They stood by the water, the lake reflecting the sky's glow, and Ivan spoke of his childhood escapes to this very spot, when the weight of his family's expectations had been too much. It's honest here, he said, and Rose smiled faintly. Then it's a good place to begin. He asked to the Hawthorne mansion hummed with a tentative warmth, as if the starlit kiss by the lake had seeped into its marble veins. Rose Everett moved through the grand foyer, her fingers brushing the petals of fresh peonies, their blush pink glow, a quiet echo of the hope she guarded so fiercely. The past weeks had been a delicate dance. Ivan Hawthorne, once a fortress of ice, lingered at breakfast, his blue eyes softer, his voice threaded with questions about her day. Their second kiss, slow and deliberate under the stars, had been a promise, not a cure, and Rose held it like a fragile ember, wary of its power to burn. She had warned him that night, her breath mingling with his. This doesn't erase the past, and Ivan's nod had been a vow to try. Yet, as she polished the oak banister on a crisp Wednesday morning, humming a melody she hadn't recalled in years, the world felt on the cusp of something new. The phone rang, shattering the stillness. Rose paused, wiping her hands on a cloth, and glanced at the screen. Mr. Ellis, Ivan's assistant. She answered, expecting a mundane request, but his voice trembled, each word a splinter in her calm. Mrs. Hawthorne, there's been an accident. Mr. Hawthorne's car. A collision on the expressway. He's alive, but it's serious. He's at Mercy General. The words hit like a tidal wave, dragging her breath with it. The cloth slipped from her fingers and the foyer spun, the peonies blurring into a pink haze. Ivan, bloodied, broken, gone, flickered in her mind like a nightmare she couldn't outrun. She didn't remember grabbing her coat or keys, only the desperate need to reach him, to anchor herself to the man who had just begun to see her. The drive to the hospital was a blur of red lights and honking horns, her hands shaking on the wheel. She burst through the emergency room doors, her coat half open, her golden hair spilling loose from its braid. The nurse at the desk recognized her name, her face softening with pity as she led Rose down a sterile hallway that reeked of antiseptic and fear. Each step was a prayer, each door a barrier between her and the truth. When the nurse pushed open the final door, Rose froze, her heart a drum against her ribs. Ivan lay on a hospital bed, pale as the sheets beneath him, a bandage wrapped around his forehead, his left arm in a sling. A monitor beeped steadily, its rhythm the only sound in the room. His pale blonde hair was matted, his sharp features softened by pain and sedation, but he was alive, gloriously, impossibly alive. Rose rushed to his side, her knees buckling as she reached the bed. Her fingers found his hand, warm but limp, and she clutched it, her voice breaking. "Don't you dare leave me, Ivan. Not now. Not when we're finally here." Tears spilled down her cheeks, soaking the sheets as she leaned forward, her forehead resting against his chest. "I love you," she whispered, the words raw, unguarded. "I love you, you stubborn, impossible man. I can't lose you." The confession poured out, a flood she couldn't stem, and she didn't notice the faint twitch of his fingers until his hand tightened around hers. She pulled back, startled, to find his blue eyes open, glazed with pain but unmistakably fixed on her. A weak smile tugged at his lips, his voice hoarse. "Did I hear that right?" "You love me?" Rose's cheeks burned, her heart lurching between relief and embarrassment. "You weren't supposed to hear that," she stammered, brushing a tear from her face. Ivan's smile grew, though it twisted with discomfort. "Perfect timing, as always," she laughed, a shaky sound that broke the room's tension, and gently pushed his hair from his forehead. "You idiot," she said, her voice soft but fierce. "You scared me." His gaze softened, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "I didn't mean to. A truck ran the light. I didn't see it coming." Her lip quivered, but she steadied herself, her hand lingering on his face. "You don't get to die, Ivan Hawthorne. Not before you prove that kiss on the bridge meant something." His eyes held hers, unwavering. "It meant everything." The nurse entered, checking vitals and adjusting the IV, and Rose stepped back, her mismatched slippers, one gray, one lavender, catching Ivan's eye. He chuckled, a low, pained sound. "That's the woman I love," he said. "Elegant chaos." She rolled her eyes, a smile breaking through her tears, and the moment felt absurdly perfect, a fragile oasis in the sterile room. As the nurse left, Rose pulled a chair to his bedside, her hand never leaving his. "Tell me what happened," she said, needing to ground herself in his voice. He spoke haltingly, recounting the crash. The screech of tires, the jolt of impact, the darkness that followed. But soon, their conversation shifted, peeling back layers they'd never dared touch. Ivan spoke of his childhood, the crushing weight of his father's expectations, the loneliness of a life lived behind polished facades. Rose confessed her own fears, the nights she'd cried in the mansion's bathroom, the terror of their wedding day, when his silence had felt like a sentence. Each word was a brick, building a bridge stronger than the one they'd kissed on. As evening fell, the hospital room glowed with a soft amber light, and Rose's presence became a constant, bringing soup, fluffing pillows, scolding him when he reached for his phone. "No work," she said, her voice firm but warm. "Just us." Ivan nodded, his hand finding hers, and for the first time, the space between them felt like a beginning, not an end. When visiting hours ended, Rose stood, hesitating in the doorway. Ivan's voice stopped her, low and earnest. "Don't go far," she turned, her smile a quiet promise. "I'm not going anywhere." As she left, the hospital's hum faded, and she carried his words. "The woman I love," like a light against the dark. The crash had shaken more than his body. It had cracked open their hearts, and whatever came next, Rose knew they would face it together. The Hawthorne mansion no longer loomed like a mausoleum. Its marble halls pulsed with a quiet vitality, as if the walls themselves had exhaled a long-held breath. Rose Everett stood in the foyer, arranging peonies in a crystal vase, their blush pink petals catching the late spring sunlight that streamed through the windows. The scars of the past weeks, Ivan Hawthorne's car accident, the hospital room where she'd confessed her love, had woven a new thread into their fragile tapestry. His recovery had been slow, but each day brought him closer to the man who had kissed her under starlight. His blue eyes, no longer icy, but warm, with a promise he was learning to keep. Rose had stayed by his bedside, her mismatched slippers and stubborn hope a testament to the bond they were rebuilding. Now, as she smoothed a petal, she felt the mansion shift. Not just a house, but a home they were claiming together. Ivan's presence had changed since his discharge. He no longer vanished at dawn with a clipped goodbye. Instead, he lingered at the breakfast table, sipping coffee while Rose arranged flowers nearby. His touches were small, but deliberate. A hand on her shoulder, a brush of fingers against her wrist, a kiss pressed to her forehead before bed. Each gesture was an apology for the years he'd ignored her, a vow to see her as she was. Rose guarded her heart, still tender from their silent past. But the hope that had sparked on the bridge and burned in the hospital now glowed steadily, urging her to trust. One Friday afternoon, the sun slanted through the windows in golden beams as Rose tied the straps of her sandals, a pale yellow linen dress swaying around her knees. Her golden hair fell loose, framing her face in soft waves. Ivan appeared in the doorway, his cane barely needed now, his navy sweater a far cry from the suits that once defined him. He raised an amused brow. "Are we escaping again?" Rose turned, a smile tugging at her lips. "You owe me an afternoon without emails or nurses hovering. Let's go." He chuckled, grabbing the car keys. "Lead the way, Mrs. Hawthorne. I'm yours." They drove without a plan, the city's concrete giving way to rolling green hills and roads that curled like ribbons through the countryside. The air was crisp, scented with wildflowers, and Rose felt a lightness she hadn't known in years. She pointed to a weathered sign for Riverside Park, and Ivan turned without question, the trust between them, a quiet victory. The dirt path opened into a clearing where the river glistened under the sun, its surface a mirror for the sky's endless blue. Rose spread a checkered blanket under an ancient oak, her movements graceful, while Ivan eased himself down, his recovery still evident in his careful motions. "No health smoothies, I hope," he teased. She pulled out chocolate croissants and strawberries, grinning. "You survived a crash. You've earned sugar." They ate in comfortable silence, the river's soft murmur a backdrop to their shared ease. Rose leaned back, watching clouds drift lazily overhead, and turned to him. "I used to imagine places like this," she said, her voice soft. "When the mansion felt like a cage, I'd dream of rivers and open skies, moments where I wasn't alone." Ivan's eyes clouded with guilt, but he reached for her hand, his thumb tracing her knuckles. "I was too lost in my own world to see you in front of me," he said. "But I see you now, Rose. Always will." She squeezed his hand, her heart a tangle of forgiveness and fear. They rose, walking to the river's edge where smooth stones peeked above the current. Rose picked one, flat and cool, and tossed it, watching it skip twice before sinking. "My father taught me this," she said. "He said a good skip meant a wish worth chasing." Ivan mimicked her, his stone dancing 4 times across the water. She gasped, laughing. "Show off!" He leaned closer, his voice low. "My wish? That you'll wear that ridiculous flower crown from our first charity event again." Her laughter rang out, bright and free, and she shoved his shoulder playfully. "You're impossible." "But you love me," he said, his smile boyish. "I do," she whispered, her voice catching. "So much it scares me." As twilight crept in, fireflies blinked to life in the tall grass, and a breeze carried the scent of pine. Rose leaned against Ivan, her head on his shoulder, the blanket wrapped around them both. "Do you think we were meant to get here?" she asked. "Even with how we started?" He was quiet, his gaze on the river. "I think the best things don't start perfect. They break, they heal, they choose to grow." She tilted her head, her eyes glistening. "So what are we now?" He pressed a gentle kiss to her lips, warm and steady. "We're us, the version that chose love." The stars emerged, pricking the velvet sky, and Ivan rested his chin atop her head. "I want this forever," he murmured. "Not the mansion, not the empire. You and me laughing over strawberries and stones." Rose smiled against his chest. "Then promise we'll fight for it, no matter what." "Forever," he said, his voice a vow. They stayed until the moon rose, silver light casting their shadows across the grass. Packing up, they walked hand in hand to the car, their silence no longer a wall, but a shared language. The mansion welcomed them back, its lights glowing through the mist, and Rose paused in the foyer, the peonies in full bloom. Ivan's hand found hers, and she knew. This was no longer a contract. It was a love reclaimed, forged in starlight and sealed by choice. As they climbed the staircase, Rose glanced back at the vase, its flowers a testament to her resilience. The past was a shadow, but the future was theirs to shape, one moment, one touch, one truth at a time. And so the tale of Rose and Ivan, a love that bloomed from silence to starlight, comes to a close, but its echoes linger. What moment stirred your heart? Was it the kiss on the bridge, the hospital confession, or their riverside laughter? Rate this story 0 to 10 in the comments and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Rose's place? Your voices light up this journey, and we're so grateful for every one of you who joined us tonight. Thank you for letting this tale be your bedtime whisper. Until our next story, sleep well, dream deeply, and never stop believing in second chances. We'll meet again under the stars.